behalf of the Danville, Pittsylvania County Chamber of Commerce, welcome to our luncheon today with Congressman Robert Hurt. I'm Wendy Everson with the Danville Regional Foundation and Chair of the Chamber's Business Development Council. Today's luncheon meeting is being co-sponsored by the Martinsville Henry County Chamber of Commerce and the Halifax County Chamber of Commerce. We welcome and thank our neighboring chambers for their continued support and collaboration. We'd also like to welcome the members of the Danville Rotary Club who have joined us for today's luncheon. At this time, it is my honor to introduce today's speaker, who is no stranger to our region. Congressman Robert Hurt currently represents Virginia's 5th District in the House of Representatives. A native of Pittsylvania County, he began his time in public service in 2001 as a member of the Chatham Town Council. From 2002 to 2007, Congressman Hurt served in the Virginia House of Delegates, representing parts of Pittsylvania County, Henry County, and the city of Martinsville. Starting in 2008, he represented the 19th District in the Senate of Virginia for 2 years, which includes the city of Danville, Pittsylvania County, Franklin County, and part of Campbell County. Congressman Hurt received his college education at Hampton-Sydney College in 1991 and his law degree from Mississippi College School of Law in 1995. From 1999 to 2010, Robert has engaged in general law practice in the courthouse of the town of Chatham. He lives in Chatham, Virginia, with his wife, Kathy, and 3 sons, Charles, Clement, and John. Please join me in giving a warm Southern Virginia welcome to Congressman Robert Hurt.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Let me first of all tell you what an honor it is to be with you all for lunch today, and I want to thank you for the invitation. We have been in Washington working in the last 45 days. I hope faithfully representing the people of the 5th District for my part. I can tell you though, it's always nice to come home, and I was reminded of how nice it was to come home. On Saturday, we had been working until the early morning hours of Saturday, attempting to get our continuing resolution passed that would fund the government for the federal government until September 30. And I got to the new agribusiness center, the agricultural center out in Chatham for the big unveiling. The governor was there. It was wonderful to be there with hundreds of friends and family and just wonderful folks. And so it was so wonderful to be there. And I knew I was home. I knew I was back among friends when I hit the door and encountered Henry Maxey. I don't know if you know Henry, but he's a farmer out in Climax. And he said to me, he said, "Robert, what are you doing here, boy? Aren't you supposed to be working?" And so I knew I was home. And I'm so glad to be here, and I mean that sincerely. Let me thank the Danville, Pennsylvania Chamber and the Halifax Chamber and the Martinsville Chamber for hosting this. What a crowd, and this is wonderful, and I thank you for that. Most important, though, I thank each of you all who are here representing your different outfits, certainly especially the folks that are in the private sector and the folks that create the jobs in this country. You know, one of the things that I think this election was about that we had in November really was a recognition that it is the private sector that creates jobs and not the government, and that if we are going to have a second American century, certainly I think we would all agree that the 20th century was our American century. If we want to have a second American century, then we have got to see the private sector grow. We need to see it succeed, and we need jobs. We need jobs here in the 5th District, and we need jobs across this great nation. That is what will make our country great and make sure that we continue to be a leader in the world. And so for each of you who are here who make that happen, I am grateful. The first 45 days in Washington has been interesting. I will tell you this, it is a mess. we have a real mess on our hands, and I know you all already knew that. But I suspected it as I left Chatham, headed to Washington on January 5th. But I can tell you that it has only been confirmed, and that sentiment has only been confirmed. And despite the fact that we are, our financial situation is as dire as it is, I can say that traveling around the capital, for instance, and traveling back and forth to Washington, I am reminded of the things that we can all be so proud of. And I was reminded of that in particular a couple of weeks ago. Charles, my oldest son, came to Washington and spent a couple of days with me while I was working. And on one occasion, we had a chance to go to the National Archives. And I don't know if you've been to the National Archives, but of course that's where our Declaration of Independence is housed, and that's where our Constitution is housed, that's where our Bill of Rights is housed. And as I stood there in the great atrium, where rotunda really, where these documents are housed, I couldn't help but think about how important it is that we get back to these founding documents. I mean, the idea that you can look at the Declaration of Independence, the actual document that was signed by our founders, the clarion call to freedom and liberty across the world, is a remarkable thing. And to see, one of the most remarkable things about the Declaration of Independence is the fact that it's so worn. You can hardly even read it. And what that tells you is that when it was first passed, it was such an amazing thing that had been signed and that people actually would put their signatures on. And then you look at it and you read about it and you realize that people had to see it. People all across this new nation wanted to see this Declaration of Independence. And so they took it on the road. They traveled all up and down the 13 colonies with this Declaration of Independence, and people got to feel it, and they got to rub it, and they got to reading it. And I thought that was such an amazing thing to behold. But what it reminded me again of is that despite the mess that we had in Washington, the things that we can be proud of are so important. They are so important, and it's worth what we're going to have to go through in the next 2 years to get where we are. The mess. The mess is a $1.6 trillion deficit. It's $14 trillion in debt. The mess is the fact that we borrow 40 cents on every dollar that we spend in Washington. When you look at the amount of debt per person, everybody in this room, every man, woman, and child in the United States, our debt translates to more than $40,000 in debt for every man, woman, and child in this country. That's what we have got to tackle. If you listen to folks like Condoleezza Rice or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, people who are at the top of the defense of our nation, and when they are asked what is the greatest national security threat facing this country, they don't say North Korea, they don't say Iran, they don't say Iraq or Afghanistan. What they say is our financial situation is the greatest national security threat facing this country. Because every day that we operate at a $1.6 trillion deficit, every day that we grow our $14 trillion in debt, our standing in the world is diminished every single day. If you stop and look at what's going on in Egypt and all in other places across the world, now is not the time for our standing in this world to be diminished. And I believe that completely into my core. I think everybody would agree that the course that we're on is unsustainable. Unfortunately, the last Congress, the 111th Congress, kicked the can down the road. And it's now fallen upon us to adopt a budget. The last Congress was unable to adopt a budget to govern the spending in this country. And now, because it was continued to March 4th, now that is our job to adopt a spending plan from March 4th until September 30th. And that's what we have been dealing with as late as early morning hours of Saturday morning, is that dealing with this continuing resolution. I was disappointed to see the budget that was proposed by the president a couple of weeks ago, a week or so ago, in which he has proposed more spending, not less. He has proposed more debt. And the most troubling thing about the debt is that if his plan were to be adopted, we would end up doubling our debt. We'd be going from $14 trillion to about $26 trillion in 10 years. Again, that's, in my humble opinion, that is the wrong course. And that's not, I don't think that's what the American people want. I don't think it's what the people in the 5th District want. You all may have heard of a fellow named Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan has offered something called the Roadmap for America. And it was interesting because during this last campaign, he was roundly criticized because it was so aggressive. But one of the things that I like to remind people of is even under his plan, and there are those who believe that his plan doesn't go far enough, but even under his plan, we don't balance our budget until 2060. Stop and think about that for a second. 2060. There was a report that was released this last week that suggested that if you were serious about closing the budget deficit between now and September 30th, you could eliminate all the federal workforce, and you still wouldn't balance it. But you still have to come up with about $50 billion. That's the mess. That's the problem. And I'm committed, I think, along with so many others who were elected on November 2nd, to fixing the problem. And it's not going to be easy. I think that November 2nd, a loud message was sent, an urgent message, and that is that we need to get our fiscal house in order, and we have to start now. And the longer we wait, the more likely it is that we're going to pass on to our children and grandchildren a tremendous mess. They're going to be poorer for it, and I question whether or not, again, whether this century will be our American century. I believe that we can do it. I believe to my very core that we can do it, but we're going to have to make tough choices. We're going to have to cut spending, and we're going to have to promote policies that create job growth. And we have to recognize that the government, and especially the federal government, doesn't know best how to take care of your property. The federal government doesn't know best how to take care of your employees or your customers. And for far too long, that's been the attitude in Washington. And that's not an attitude I share. I think that it's quite the opposite. I think that those of us who are elected to serve must listen to the people that they represent and carry with them to Washington the common sense principles, the common sense ideas that come from the people who elected them. And that's, for far too long been backwards in Washington, D.C. What are the things that we can do to change, and what are the things that we're doing now to change? A balanced budget amendment. I was happy to sign on as an original co-sponsor of Bob Goodlatte's balanced budget amendment. I've been happy to work alongside of him to get that passed, and I will continue to do so. The state balances its budget, the local governments balance their budgets, the businesses balance their budgets, and the individuals balance their checkbooks. There's no reason that the federal government shouldn't do the same. I think that that's critical that we do. Cutting spending. You know, we have taken a vote a week under the UP program to cut spending in specific and serious ways. I think, though, that this last series of votes on the continuing resolution demonstrate that you've got some people who are very serious about cutting spending. And for far too long, people say, listen, I'm all for balancing the budget, I'm all for cutting spending, but don't cut my program. That's how it's been going in Washington for the last 20 years. And now we have what we have. And I think now you've got a group of people in this 112th Congress who are going to be willing to take tough stands, even if it may cause them political capital, may cause them political harm, in order to get spending under control and see our country succeed. I think also another part of our success will be found in reducing the number of regulations. I think we need to exercise oversight over these regulatory agencies. And Darrell Issa, who is the chairman of the Oversight Committee, I think is going to be very serious about this. And he's made a point to say, he's a congressman from California, will be the chairman of the Oversight Committee, and he has made it very clear, this is not politics. We're going to have real people who are affected by these regulations come in, and we're going to conduct hearings on how these regulations affect businesses and individuals, and we're going to have the regulatory agencies in there, and they're going to be made to answer why. And if you can't answer why with common sense answer, then the regulation needs to be eliminated. And I think that you're going to see that take place over the course of this 112th Congress. I think also, and this is something that I've been pleased in our speaker, John Boehner, something that he understands, and so many of you are friends for many reasons, but also because I know that many of you have come to Richmond and are familiar with the way things are done in Richmond. In Richmond, we have a very strong committee process. I like to say legislators in Richmond, they pop the hood. They get under there and let's work on this thing, figure out how we're going to get it done. That can only take place in the committee. And I think what I've been surprised about since I've been there is that the committees have, certainly in the last 10 years, have not operated like that at all. They don't have any control. They have no power. And as a consequence, you don't have that infusion of common sense coming from members of the committee, whether Republicans or Democrats. I mean, you need to have the infusion of common sense from the people in those committee hearings. And if you've ever been to a committee hearing in Richmond, any citizen can stand up and say why he thinks this bill is good or why she thinks this bill is terrible. Any citizen can do that, and they're given that courtesy. And the committee learns from that. You don't have anything like that in Washington, that I can tell. And our speaker, Boehner, has decided that he wants to reinstitute power in those committees to be able to do that kind of work so that we can look at these problems. What has happened over the last decade or more has been that you've had a few people making the policy calls on big bills, and then they get rushed through committee with no hearing. Nobody pays attention to each other. Democrats and Republicans talking across each other, and then once the bill's passed, everybody runs out, gets their photo op, gets on the news, and they say, well, on those gory details, all those unintended consequences, well, we'll let the regulatory agency figure that out. Oh, stop and think about how dangerous that is. And I think it's a large part of why we are in this country where we are. So that's something that I look forward to supporting. Let me just close by saying this, and I think I can take some questions. I think is that part of the program. Let me just close by saying this again. It is a great honor for me to be able to represent you in the United States Congress. It is a great honor because I believe that we are at a very important point in our nation's history, and I do not take for granted the responsibility that you have placed on me. I can tell you this, there are many decisions that I will have to make in the next 2 years on your behalf. I will always do it in good faith, and I will always do it faithfully and honestly. And while we may not always agree on votes that I may take, I trust that you know that in my heart that I'm doing it because I believe that's the best thing for this country, best thing for our children and our grandchildren. So thank you.